Call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today, which is Monday, December 16th at 5:30. I would just ask if anyone in the audience has their cell phone or other electronic devices to put them onto silent or vibrate so we can keep the distractions down at a minimum. Roll call, please.
Janser,
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Padragula.
Here.
Straight.
Here.
Wolski.
Here.
Sitma.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Number 3 on our agenda this afternoon is our consent items. Are there any items that the council members would like pulled? We have 3.1 through 3.12 on our agenda.
Mr. Mayor, 12, please.
3.12?
Yep.
Any other items within our consent? Alderman Janser?
If there aren't any others to be pulled, I'd move consent on the remaining ones.
Second.
Motion to approve by Alderman Janser and a second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion to approve. And for the audience and those at home, this is again on the consent items to approve as forwarded or recommended items 3.1 through 3.11. Any further discussion or any discussion from the council? Please call the roll.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Pittner.
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. 3.12 is the approval of plans and specs for the SWIFT EP, the 3135.2E. This plan inspects for the final bank stabilization area identified in our levee inspections on our SWIFT, as well as the removal of sediment from the river channel is complete and ready for bid. The recommendation is approval of the plans and specifications and authorization for the bid.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner for approval. Discussion on the motion. Alderman Wolski, you pulled this.
Mayor Sema, thank you. Question for Mr. Jonason. Dan, this is a pretty big package of information. I tried to read through it as quickly as I could, but is there any part of this project that has to do with any work between the main river channel or the active river channel and a dead loop? So are we going to be working on culverts or anything like that in those areas?
Mayor Sitma, Alderman Wolski, not at this time. It's all along the channel. Mainly it's a bank stabilization project at this time. We pulled out a portion from the last project, Swift D, which is to work to a gate well and outfall just north of 4th Avenue on the west side of Broadway, over where the old Remax is. So that will be some culvert work that's in there. We do plan to bring back at a future time cleaning of some of the gatewell structures, or the, I guess, the outfall and inlet culverts into the dead loops. There's heavy silt buildup in there, but rather than, I guess, have it on a contract where it's a different type of contractor and all we'd see is additional markup on it, we plan to bring that back at a different time and have that project done.
Okay. Follow-up comment, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Dan, I appreciate the information. I bring it up because, again, in the past, the council has approved this general idea of trying to see the dead loops revitalized. There is a very, very rough engineering concept for reworking those gatewell structures, and so what I would call a small bit of frustration for me has been observing the work going on to the north of Oak Park, where we seem to have dramatically rebuilt that culvert when it seems like we might have been able to subtly redesign that and get the same current operational pieces we have right now, but get improved river flow aspects in that dead loop channel. So as these projects come forward in the future, I want to make sure that we're not investing in old infrastructure and old engineering practices that I think we've decided we want to move on from.
Any further questions for Public Works Director? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to section 4 of our agenda this afternoon. We have the action items. 4.1 is the appointment of the contract prosecutor. Attorney Kate Pearson was appointed to represent the city of Minot in municipal prosecution matters from January 1 of 19 to December 31st of 2019. Over the past year, Attorney Pearson provided quality legal services and represented the city diligently. Unfortunately, Attorney Pearson is moving out of state as unable to continue providing municipal prosecution services for the city of Minot. Two recommendations is the city council appoint Attorney Morgan Glines to represent the city of Minot in the prosecution of municipal ordinance violations and authorize the mayor to sign the contract relating to these services on behalf of the city of Minot.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve, second by Alderman Pittner. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes. Motion is approved. 4.2 is Station 5 AE2S engineering contract. This is FD 0024. The AE2S provided the survey services for the Station 5 project. They are the civil engineering for the project, and the surveying was completed before having snow-covered grounds. Surveys are required for the project to be designed. The services are not put within the architectural and engineering contract of the building. Two recommendations is to approve the contract agreement with the AE2S for civil engineering services for Fire Station 5, and to authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. Discussion on the motion. And I see our finance director coming forward, Mr. Lakefield. Good afternoon.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I believe there was also a budget amendment that was attached to this item as well. The funding for the fire department is actually in the 2020 budget. This work needed to be done before the snowfall or snow accumulation, so it's using some 2019 funding to pay for this contract.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Here, my printout must be a couple of hours old here. Taking a look at the online schedule we have here, does the motion agree? And the second is, item 2 is pass an ordinance to amend the 2019 annual budget to increase the capital purchase and decrease fire operation supplies for the survey engineering for Fire Station number 5 and transfer the revenue accordingly.
Yes.
Yes.
It's on there.
Any further discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 4.3. I'm going to go with my tablet now. As part of the NDR program, staff have been investigating potential City Hall locations within the downtown corridor. City Hall Technical Review Team has met twice to review the technical information available for the Big M Building and the Wells Fargo Building. And based on the committee's findings, the staff recommend the council discontinue the site selection process for the former Midwest Federal Savings and Loan Building known as the Big M. And 2, recommend the council enter into the due diligence and purchase negotiations for the former Wells Fargo Building.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Janser to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Olson. I believe for discussion, City Manager Barry had some information here, followed by our city engineer.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, tonight we are asking for your blessing to move forward with negotiations to purchase and continue due diligence on the Wells Fargo building. This comes after a lengthy period of assessment that's been done both internally for space analysis. You might recall earlier this spring, we conducted a fairly robust space analysis identifying various components of the organization that were going to be consolidated and potentially moved, an analysis of the existing space requirements that those particular units occupied, a projection of space needs going forward with an assumption of a 50-year build-out for the building, or at least utilization of the building. That information was then utilized to identify a couple of different options. You might recall at the council retreat, we presented several different options to you in regards to how to move forward on this particular project. One of those options was to discuss an expansion of the current City Hall building. This particular building, maybe building off the back, building up, building over towards the west, those types of things. We also talked about building new, potentially on existing city property that's owned just to the south of this facility. And then also we presented an option for rehabilitating some existing building which was contemplated in the National Disaster Resiliency Program, and of course which we were awarded about $3.75 million to utilize if we were to pursue the rehabilitation option. The first two options I just explained, of course, do not would not qualify for the utilization of those funds. We were, of course, encouraged to proceed with identifying buildings and utilizing a rehabilitation approach first. So then staff began work internally to analyze the two buildings that met the initial space needs, and those are the two that are before you right now. A study of available reports and engineering analyses, also walkthroughs of the buildings, and also analysis against parking and space and other sorts of considerations was conducted over about a 10 to 12 week period, culminating in the development of the two reports that have allowed us to essentially get comfortable with the recommendation that we've put before you. So if you have specific questions about the reports and what's in them, of course, Mr. Meyer, our city engineer, can help address those. I just wanted to say we have spent considerable time with the technical team researching this and looking through it, and the technical team was unanimous rather in its recommendation to move in this direction. So I think we're feeling quite comfortable with regard to the recommendation. Of course, time is of the essence, as you might know. The money, if we were to utilize it from the NDR program, does expire on September 30th, 2020. And so, or excuse me, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so we of course, have a lot of work to do if we're going to rehab this particular facility and get it ready for occupying or
Occupation.
occupancy.
There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So that's what I have for you. If you have specific questions, Mr. Meyer can help address those as well about the buildings.
Mr. Meyer, do you have anything to add prior to perhaps some of the questions from council?
No, sir. I available for anything that you might want to know.
Seeing as there is a significant amount of information that went into the vast technical overview of both of these, I would expect a few questions, if nothing else. So any questions for either City Manager Barry or our City Engineer, Alderman Straight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Meyer, can you just, for the audience, can you remind everyone of what the square footage is of this building to start currently?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, we're operating in about, I think, around 13,000 square feet in the City Hall office portion. That does not include the portion that the police department utilizes.
Gotcha. Thanks, Lance.
Further questions or comments? Alderman Janser.
Lance, could you just maybe kind of summarize the elements of, kind of what led to the conclusions of the technical committee and, sort of how these, comparisons came out?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, majority of the things that we looked at were obviously what space do we need? So we have to start with not only what we need today, but where we're going to be in the future. So I think the team put together a pretty good estimate of what we're going to be looking at. So that helped give us some guide rails to work off of. Really what it came down to then was trying to find all of the information available for both buildings and summarizing that. So we had a lot of documentation available to us for the M building, not as much for the Wells Fargo building, but we're still able to go through the building with myself and our property maintenance superintendent and got a good feel for the building systems that were available. We did a pretty thorough walkthrough for what we could do just visually. And the other thing that we looked at, available parking, we looked at costs. We had to put some magnitude of remodel costs and acquisition costs to this. Those are detailed in the report. We would have to spend a little bit more money in the M building versus the Wells Fargo building just because of age and some of the remediation items that we'd have to take care of in that building. So obviously the cost per square foot to rehabilitate the M building is going to be higher than the Wells Fargo building. And then after we summarized all of that, we took a look at just what are we going to need, what's the feasibility of doing some of these things to both buildings, and then we utilized that information to make a recommendation to the technical committee. We talked through that internally and then presented you with the information.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. And maybe this would be a question for Tom. Just with the incorporation of funds for this project being somewhat a local share, how does that affect the timeline on which this project has to be completed? Excuse me. Does that change when this project has to be completely done, since there will be some local share dollars incorporated?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, that's a great question. Essentially, we would have to spend the NDR funds before the end of the deadline, which is September 30th, 2022. We anticipate that that won't be a problem, even if the project continues after and the city continues to use its local match. It wouldn't disqualify us from utilizing those funds.
Okay, thank you.
And for that, Alderman Pittner, there was also the point of discussion on both structures as we were looking at it, seeing as that because of construction seasons and a lot of other things going on, that we wouldn't anticipate a turnkey operation at either one, whatever that recommendation came out. But this one certainly, going through all of the finite details, stood out for a lot of other reasons, at least for the city's use and needs for what the comparisons were. Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mayor. Lance, maybe just a little bit more clarification. So in the considerations that your group made, was it considered that everything from this facility would move to the new city hall? And I guess I'm particularly thinking about like the dispatch group for one, or council chambers would also move. I mean, how did you rack and stack those couple of things?
Certainly. Mr. Mayor and Alderman Janser, the departments that would be making the transition to the new building would include space for the mayor and the city council, city manager, city attorney's office, the finance department, HR, the NDR program, which is housed right now in Public Works, information technology, which is over at the auditorium, and then central dispatch, which is in the police department. So those departments would be making the transition over to the new city hall. We included a small amount of space for a potential congressional office lease that may or may not come to fruition. And then there's things in there like general office supply storage areas, hallways, that sort of thing that kind of have to go with whatever option is selected. But those are the departments that would be making the transition over.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to make that point because, things like the, central dispatch and those things take a fair amount of space as well.
Correct.
City Manager Barry, did you have more to add? Okay, thank you. Alderman Patrick.
Yeah, just a comment and a question for the city engineer. I first had the chance to review these reports, which were very lengthy, actually. I think one was 18 pages, the other was like 9 or 12, something like that. Last week, I saw the item, and I asked Lance for the reports, and I read them then. I understand that they were just distributed widely this afternoon. I was busy and checking my email constantly, but didn't get it this afternoon. But I'm glad I had the chance to take a few days to look at them. They were very thorough, and I think there's been some public discussion about this, several letters to the editor, And I think it's important that people know why you're making the recommendation. And I just want to review my understanding of it, and if you could confirm it or disconfirm it, that would be helpful. This is a major project. It's something that'll stand there for several generations. It's going to cost a lot of money, and I think it's important the public realize that. I actually, before I saw the report, was pretty much a fan of the Big M building. I had my professional office there for 2 years, many years ago. It was a wonderful building. It was very well taken care of. It's an iconic structure from Minot. You can see it from just about anywhere. And a lot of people, I think, including me, have a sentimental attachment to it. After I read the report, in fact, as I went through it page by page, I became very concerned about that building in terms of the structure, not the structural issues, but some of the life safety and other issues. And I think about a third of the way through it, I came to the conclusion that this is just a white elephant. And I feel badly about that, but it just seems very uneconomical. If I remember correctly, besides all of the unknowns, of which there are many, and particularly in that building, there's to rehab the Midwest Federal Building, the old one, would cost something like $18.4 million. And the Norwest Bank Building, or Wells Fargo Bank Building, was something like 9.7. So we're looking at a difference of basically $9 million. Am I correct in my understanding that it would be about that much difference?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, that's what we have in the report based on the information that we know. But you have to understand that we're going on a lot of assumptions here. We don't have any architects on staff, and so we're trying to use some numbers that are used out there in the public on previous projects. So obviously, that's not the final cost. These are estimates to try to get us into a ballpark figure. Both buildings structurally are in great shape. It's just when we look at the Wells Fargo building as far as a configuration for our needs, it lends itself to so many more options. The column spacing allows us to have more public assembly space, which is very important for municipal government. For an office-type setting, that's probably not as important. So when you look at the structural layout of the Midwest Federal Building, if you're going to use it as a straight-up office, I think it's a great building for that. Where our needs probably tend towards more open space, we do obviously need office space that can be on the outside, which it's already set up to be. So when you look at some of these remodel costs, you have to keep some of those things in mind, where we'd be totally converting the Midwest Federal Building to suit our needs, where the Wells Fargo Building, there's a lot of components that are already set up and ready to go, so your remodel costs aren't as much. It's not necessarily that the M Building is any kind of a lost cause. It's just for our needs, it would be cheaper to rehabilitate the Wells Fargo Building.
If I could elaborate on that, if I remember the report correctly, it said that building new would be cheaper than remodeling the Big M building.
Based on some preliminary cost estimates, correct.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The reports I found very thorough and, like I say, very convincing, and they made me turn around completely.
Thank you, Lance. And just to maybe reiterate one other component here, and that was one thing that we took very careful consideration to note as well, the differences for our use as a municipality, and not to try to look down on one over the other or disparage one over the other, because as our city engineer pointed out, our needs are different than general office or perhaps a professional building in that respect. So I would only ask that we just take that into consideration too as we're running our comparisons. Yeah. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one of the comments that Alderman Padragula had made as far as the cost, we're looking at about an $18 to $9 million difference. And I haven't had a chance to fully delve into these reports as thoroughly as I would like, but just kind of skimming over the reports, some of the specs on the building, is it about 82,000 square feet versus 45,000 square feet? Big M building versus Wells Fargo building?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, that's correct, but that's based on gross square footage. So if you do a comparison of what we call net rentable space, so the M building has slightly over 50,000 square feet, whereas the Wells Fargo building would be about 42,000 square feet.
Just to follow up to that, Mayor.
Continue.
with renovation of either building, would the entire buildings be renovated? Would there be kind of a fine comb, gone through all the kind of nooks and crannies to renovate the building as needed? Or would there be any portion of these buildings that would be left kind of untouched?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, at this time, we've made the assumption that it would be a full remodel top to bottom on both.
Okay, thank you.
Also for consideration, as we had discussed with current tenants in there, and as we just alluded to with the final completion project not being needed by the deadline of the full NDR program, we would also likely be under discussion if this were to move forward on the current tenants, on potentially saving those until last, seeing for the full program, either long-term or short-term relocation. All of those options would be on the table. But in the full scope of where it all ends up, it would be, as Mr. Meyer had pointed out, a full remodel in the end. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Meyer, just also for the public, we've had this discussion about CTE being possibly another potential NDR program. Is that included in this square footage number of need, or has that been taken out?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, that number is not in this report. I think there's some other options on the table at this point that are looking at that square footage.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, Mr. Meyer as well, my understanding, municipal government, we need this space. Have we accounted for this space in whatever future building, or it's always been my assumption that we were gonna keep City Hall, city meetings right here. Am I wrong in that assumption?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Straight, at this time, we have our council chamber space allocated in the new City Hall building. And this potentially could become a municipal court space or something different.
And following that discussion, Lance, as well with municipal court, and the idea is to get the Monet Auditorium completely freed up for its intended use, so that some of those programs or I think venues could finally return because of the limited space right now. Many of those have long since left the Magic City and have been able to come back because of the limited space at the auditorium. And then long-term needs, also potential other build-outs on-site or at near site. Alderman Pittner?
Thank you, Mayor. Lance, just maybe referencing the memo here, today we would need approximately 44,772 square feet. And then additional build-out over a 50-year time frame, we would need roughly just under 54,000 square feet. And when we look at these buildings, we have one that's 50 and one that's 42,000 net usable feet. Can you kind of explain that? Because it doesn't seem like in that 50-year time frame, neither of these buildings would be adequate, if I'm reading that right, rough numbers.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, you're correct. The M building is going to come close to that 50-year projection. Maybe one thing to keep in mind, when we looked at the space analysis needs, I think that we looked at a great layout for what could be for a building. But, we just had a conversation this morning at the department head level of some future projects, and one of those would be digitizing city records. In our space analysis right now, we have 6,000 square feet allocated for records. We all know that government generates a lot of paper. It's just part of how that operation works. That space would be about 3 times the size of this room and the conference room next door. If you digitize the vast majority of that space, or of those records, do you really need 6,000 square feet? Now we just bought half of our future expansion room back. And as we become more digital in our operations, I truly think that over time we'll need less of that space. So it's going to be technology optimization and those sort of aspects that will probably end up buying us the rest of the space we would need in that 50-year building. And of course, there are other options potentially available to us with parking ramps next door and those sort of things. So I don't think that either site, as far as the space goes, I would be concerned about that. I think we have the options available to utilize either space and get us to where we need to be.
Alderman Straight?
Mr. Mayor, I guess from my standpoint, because I'm not like Alderman Padragula, I didn't receive this last week. I just received it later in the day today, and I've just skimmed it to Alderman Pittner's point. I would like to see our body hold this until at least a couple of weeks from now. It's a fairly significant decision, and I don't feel prepared. I was going under some assumptions of previous conversations we had that this room alone was not going to be included in a future building conversation. Maybe my colleagues can correct me, and maybe I misheard a previous conversation to that degree, but I would move or amend the motion to table this until a future time so we can maybe get some more clarity between all of us, because I think that's important for the public as we move forward on this.
So we have a motion to hold for 2 weeks? Is that what the motion was?
Or just amend it to
We just need a motion to
Yeah.
hold.
move to hold.
We have a motion to hold the item.
I'll second that.
Second by Alderman Padragula. Discussion only on the motion to hold. Any discussion on the motion? There is no discussion on the motion to hold. Please call the roll.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
No.
Janser,
No.
Olson,
No.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay.
Motion, the item is being held. We will come back to it at a later time. That takes us to, let's see here, 4.4, so I'm not skipping one this afternoon here. Actually, this evening now, it's officially 6 o'clock. 4.4 is the updated purchasing policy, the Buy Local Task Force recommendation. City staff met internally to review and modify the current purchasing requirements. City staff then created a draft purchasing policy for review by the council. The two recommendations coming forward tonight is recommend the approval of the proposed purchasing policy, which includes the Buy Local Task Force recommendations to include the definition of local vendor and the section relating to local vendor in the proposed purchasing policy. The second recommendation is approve the corresponding change to sections 2-133 of the City of Minot Code of Ordinances.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Olson to approve.
Second.
Second by Alderman Pittner. I think our finance director, Mr. Lakefield, has some information for us.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I just want to make sure we're clear because we have a lot of moving pieces here with this agenda item tonight. We need approval to move forward with the updated purchasing policy, which we will bring back at the next council meeting in the form of a formal resolution. So, but we need the go-ahead to move ahead with that so we can draft the resolution. And then the current purchasing policy is contained in the city ordinance, and the attached ordinance that is with here would repeal that entire section and then reenact section 2-133 of Division 2 to reference the new policy, and the new purchasing policy would be governed by policy instead of by ordinance. So a lot of different things going on here, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I'll certainly answer any questions related to the policy or any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. So in other words, it was about as easy to get to that as it was getting through the initial piece to where we're at with our purchasing policy. So,
We have to
any-
decide what comes first.
Right. Any questions for our finance director on the course of action that this is taking? Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Any discussion on the motion that is before us? Any discussion? Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask, and I don't know if Mr. Lakefield is the right party, but I guess I'll start with him since he's at the podium. So I notice in the proposed purchasing policy summary that in the $0 to $5,000 category of the proposed policy, it is is there, I guess my question is this, is there a requirement in that category to get a local quote?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, there the local vendors would be covered under the guidelines, but until it reaches over $5,000 in the proposed policy, they would not be required to get additional oral or written quotes. Now, there would be nothing that would prohibit them from doing that if they wanted to shop around and obviously, in most cases, the department heads or the purchasing agent would do that, but there would be nothing that would require that local bid for those purchases.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. No questions here. I think I have a pretty firm understanding of this. With regards to the first moving piece, which is the buy local component, this is an approach that I hadn't considered, but I like it ultimately in terms of providing a little more opportunity and freedom for our employees to do what they need to do in order to, move business expeditiously, but also kind of just get the government processes out of the way. And I trust the judgment of our department heads and other purchasing individuals with the city. And so my next comment is going to be a little bit opposed to that idea, because I do trust, I simply think the thresholds we're talking about here are farther than the public is comfortable with. In terms of not until $50,000 do we start a sealed bid process. I'm just uncomfortable with that. I think that number is too high. I like the general framework of what we've talked about here, but I can't support this particular policy tonight because I think our proposed purchasing policy summary just is not in alignment with what I feel like the public is at.
Further questions or discussion? Alderman Patagula.
If I remember correctly, when this was first presented, whoever presented it said that these thresholds were commonly understood, commonly accepted ones. I don't know if they were for the state or other municipalities, and I guess I'd like to be reminded of that.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Padragula, the thresholds really vary amongst the cities in North Dakota. Some are lower than the $50,000 sealed bid threshold, but some are higher, including, I think Wahpeton has more than $100,000 is when sealed bids are required. The state's thresholds for these micro purchases is that sealed bids are required when they're more than $100,000. But Bismarck is $25,000. The city of Grand Forks is $30,000. So they really do vary amongst a lot of the cities.
So perhaps either, I don't know if this would be Mr. Lakefield, Mr. Berry, or perhaps even Mr. McMartin to maybe shed a little bit of light on where we came to with the bid process, or was it kind of finding some middle ground on where other communities are at, on where we settled with this functional piece? Ms. Hendershot.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to make one more comment just so that it's clear. The while sealed bids might not be required until it's $50,000, if the item is not included in the budget, it would still come to the city council for review and approval. That wouldn't be an administrative approval, so that would still be the same process. I know that's not exactly what we're talking about, but I just want to make sure that that's clear.
So, Ms. Hendershot, if it was a capital purchase within the CIP plan, whether it be a piece of machinery or what have you, if it was in the budget, of course, we would see that, but if it was not, then it would come before us in that respect.
Yep, once it hit, Mr. Mayor, once it hits that $50,000 and above, it would come here, but after, sorry, let me think about this now. So if it's in the budget and it goes through the process, it does not need to come to this body. It has to be identified specifically by the line item, And we've defined that within the policy. Now, if it's not in the budget and we need a budget amendment, or if we need a budget amendment, it comes to the city council for approval of the purchase and the amendment.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further discussion on that point? I saw Mr. McMartin come forward before we maybe get to another question.
I would only offer that part of the conversation did surround those categories. And speaking from the private sector and the chamber, the folks that were involved in those conversations said, you know, and some of them were sole proprietors, and so that puts a different light on it. But in terms of dealing with the budget that you get approved by either a board of directors or the corporate office, once you've received a budget, as long as you're within your budget, you're free to operate within those purviews. And so if items have been budgeted, if they've been clearly called out in the budget, or if you're purchasing office supplies and it falls within the line of the office supplies, our feeling at that, our part of the feeling was that makes sense. It speeds the process along, and I think as Alderman Wolski pointed out, I think we had faith in the processes that the city has laid in, and as long as it was budgeted, it made sense.
Thank you, Mr. McMartin. Alderman Patagula, you did.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do we have any rough idea, just order of magnitude, how many expenditures in that 50,000 plus category, or we're asking for, what if it's 50 or more require bids, somewhere in that 25 to 50 range? I mean, what I had asked about earlier was I wanted to have some sort of report back after 6 months, a very preliminary report, maybe after a year, a more systematic report as to how much we're talking about, how many purchases. I'm not quite as uncomfortable as Alderman Wolski, but I do have a little bit of hesitancy about that. I mean, 50 grand's a lot of money, and I trust our city staff, but there's a public relations aspect to it, and people, I think, rightfully ask questions like that. So I'd be willing to go with this, but I guess I'd like to have some idea of, when we look at it in 6 or 12 months, are we going to be looking at a lot of these things, or are there going to be relatively few of them, or what?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Padragula, in today's ordinance, the threshold is $15,000. Anything over $15,000 requires formal bidding process, which also requires city council approval. And we have a number of those, and they come in front of the council fairly regularly. I think there are a couple on tonight's agenda item. So they're fairly common. I believe tonight's agenda, the one that is on the agenda tonight, and the new version of the purchasing policy would not require bringing back to this body as long as it was identified specifically in the line item in the budget. And that's where I think this policy deviates a little bit from the current policy. The current policy is a lot more broad and vague. It references as long as there's enough money in the budget by fund that it wouldn't require bringing back to the council. There is a reference to the line item and specifically by line item. But I think the definition in the proposed policy, we would anticipate that the budgets would require additional detail. And if that detail was not in the budget, then it would have to come back to the council for approval.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And for the council members, I think some of the questions that you're investigating have to do with levels of comfort, which is going to be up to you. I mean, really, you get to decide what your level of comfort is in regard to which threshold requires the staff to do which activity. Some of the things that we've talked about, we're trying to modernize these thresholds to allow for greater flexibility while preserving the same level of scrutiny, actually improving the level of scrutiny because of the way we'll be processing these things as we go through. Certainly some of the information that you're asking for right now, we're limited in being able to provide, at least easily, because we don't have the automated systems, we don't have the ERP system. All of these types of questions we can answer for you, we'll be able to answer for you much more easily and much more quickly. As it relates to thresholds, this was a balancing act for us. You know, some of us wanted to see the thresholds higher. I mean, if the state allows for higher thresholds and other cities have higher thresholds, actually twice the threshold that we're recommending here, you know, why not? So then, but at the same time, we recognize that the council would probably have some heartburn with that. And so we lessened those thresholds. I think a couple of things to keep in mind is that, you know, we're still talking about informal oral quotes and informal written quotes. The informal oral quotes start at $5,000. So there will be price checking going on there. It's not a sealed bid process, but there will be at least 3 required informal quotes between $5,000 and $25,000, and then 3 informal written quotes, which we'll have to justify as well, between $25,000 and $50,000. And then at $50,000, we start the sealed bid process. Sealed bid processes take a lot of time. They can be onerous for both the vendors and they can be onerous for the staff. We have formal processes by which they have to go through. They take time. There's lots of advertising and those kinds of things. So there are impacts associated with the work that way. And we believe that if we have an already approved budget line item for something that's been identified during the budget process, this is just the way we go about purchasing those items. We're still going to be getting quotes. We're still going to be doing sealed bids. We just need a little bit, or would like a little bit higher thresholds. I will add the one other component that we did talk in the Buy Local Task Force was that of providing greater flexibility for Buy Local quotes, if you will. And these larger thresholds, and I think Mr. McMartin will be able to speak to this also, the larger thresholds which allow for the informal processes that we're envisioning here allow also for our ability and the flexibility to go after more local quotes because now they're informal. They're not sealed bid. Once they go to sealed bid, anyone can bid on those who gets the notice and wants to bid. So our hands are tied at that point. We have very little control over what happens at that point. So there are some gives and there are some takes in this policy, and I appreciate you're struggling with it because that means we probably are pretty close to where we had hoped to be. So I don't know, Mayor, with your permission, if Mr. McMartin has anything to say about the buy local component on that, but I just wanted to mention those couple things.
Again, if we go way back to the beginning and you look at what the chamber presented, it was a different concept, trying to address a different problem. As we've sat down and visited as a task force, I think that was one of the qualities that the folks from the chamber side of the house looked at and liked, because it did make sense. It did seem to say, if we're going to be getting verbal quotes, if we're going to be getting a written quote that's not a sealed bid quote, it's going to increase the likelihood that some dollars are going to be spent locally. And I think that was ultimately what we were looking for. And we thought, again, that the thought process that the city had put into the thresholds and the thought process that the city had put into the verbal quote and the handwritten quote, if you wish, made sense, and we saw potential to have that business increase in the local community.
Yes, Alderman Janser.
Just adding this thought to the discussion, and I've, in kind of wrestling with, the comfort level that the city manager referred to, and I think my view of it is this: if we have approved something as a line item in the budget, I'm comfortable with the thresholds and the process that is here. The other part of that, though, is to have also some trust that if there is some reason that there ought to be reconsideration of the thought process, that our department heads are professional enough to bring that back to us. Because in some cases, I think what people are worried about is, okay, well, we passed the budget in September, and by a year later, when they're actually using that purchasing authority for that line item, that maybe something has changed. Well, it would be my expectation that our city employees, our department heads, would be bringing that back to us then for perhaps some kind of a change to the budget. And so I'm comfortable with this. And as far as the, the questions about, well, how many of this kind are there and how many of that kind are there? It seems to me like if there's a bunch of these, we're gaining more efficiency. So almost the more the better, recognizing that we've already looked at these things and decided that they should be in the budget. Thank you.
Something further, Mr. McMorro.
If I may, I just, with Mr. Lakefield's explanation up front, and it wasn't the first time that I had heard that, taking it out of ordinance form, putting it into a policy form also makes it easier down the road should the city council decide that changes need to be made. You're making a change to a policy as opposed to an ordinance. So you can certainly react much more quickly and make changes if you think something is really out of whack. And I think the reporting requirements that you've got set in place with the manual form, or will have set in place, with the manual form until the online portion is available, or the computerized portion is available with new software later in the year, gives you an ability to do that check and balance as you move forward.
Further questions or discussion?
Mr. Mayor, if I may add one other point as well. Part of the reason we started really looking at this purchasing policy is because our existing process is antiquated and inefficient. Part of the advantage we're going to see with our upcoming software upgrades is the ability to change how we handle purchasing within the city. In today's environment, if it doesn't require formal bids, a lot of this work is done behind the scenes at the department levels. And as long as they have money in their budget and they go through the process, oftentimes by the time we see the information, it's an invoice. We've already got the goods. And if there is a problem at that point, it's hard to go back and correct that or to undo what's already been done. So the thought process is, as we move forward, we are going to take a more front-end approach, with the requisition process. So it would go through a requisition, you do all the budget checks, the approvals, and everything. The requisition gets approved, and then it generates a purchase order and moves through the purchasing process. So all of the approvals would be on the front end before that even gets sent to the vendor for approval, which is a lot more common process in a city our size, what we should be doing. We've been technologically challenged with what we have and how things are set up. We anticipate that will change with the adoption of the new Munis product here in October of next year. But why we're trying to move forward with this now is we are building those rules and those approvals and those processes today in the current environment. We're in that process to build that logic into the new system before we go live. So we need to kind of get this figured out. Whatever the amount is, we can build that in, but we're at the point where we have to make these decisions with our new software and program that information so we don't have to redo that work later on.
Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Further questions or discussion? Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I fully anticipated hearing more about the local vendor portion of this policy. And I'm assuming by the lack of conversation that most people are in approval of it. But I think it's important to note that we did spend a lot of time discussing this and the importance of it not being solely Minot located businesses. But we look to our outreaching communities, and you can see by the list of zip codes that we are reaching out to about 65 miles out of Minot. And just to prove that we appreciate the business, we appreciate residents of those communities coming into Minot to do business. We know that those dollars are circulating, and we want to do that in return for the businesses that are close by. So I'm proud of the list of zip codes, and I hope that people are reviewing them closely to see that when we're looking for different vendors, that there are options for vendors out in the outlying communities.
Thank you, Alderman Olson, for that as well. Further discussion or questions? Alderman Patagula.
I feel quite reassured by what I'm hearing from Dave and from Tom I think putting the scrutiny, putting the accountability up front is a very good idea. And with our new software system, I think we'll be more accountable. You'll be able to answer questions like mine as to how much was in this category. I keep forgetting that. I keep forgetting how challenged we are in some ways. My main concern, and I've mentioned this before, and I feel strongly enough about it where I'll mention it again, is in terms of potential conflict of interest. If you buy more locally, there's the increased likelihood for cronyism, for favoritism, and things like that. And even if people don't use inappropriate purchasing practices, I think we have to be, as a government, above and beyond suspicion. And I don't want people, well, they can always charge us, I guess, with things, but we have to be scrupulous about this. And I've talked at some length and corresponded at some length with the city attorney and the city HR person. And the current conflict of interest policy is, in my professional opinion, inadequate, woefully inadequate. And I have been reassured that we will be looking at this as part of a revision to our overall city personnel policies in this coming year. And I've submitted proposed wording to both of them in terms of my expertise as an expert in the field of professional ethics. Not quite governmental ethics, but certainly professional ethics. And I feel very comfortable with that. That's something that may take some rejiggering and refiguring. But, basically, I think we have to have an ironclad policy against any kind of favoritism or conflict of interest or self-dealing. It's a small community. It's tempting. If your brother-in-law owns in a garage, it's tempting to send him some work or vice versa. So that's my major concern. And I feel comfortable. I feel reassured, again, by what I've heard. And if I'm on the council or not on the council, I hope that that's dealt with seriously, because we do need, if we open things up, if we have more flexibility, we need to have that ironclad assurance that there is no conflict of interest and people are acting on behalf of what's best for the city, not for themselves or their relatives or business they may happen to have some share in. So I will be supporting this, given those reassurances I've received today about financial accountability and also about ethical accountability. And please understand, I'm not making any accusations or charges or anything, but I think if we're dealing with the public's money, we have to be above reproach. And we need to have an ironclad policy, in my opinion, in terms of any potential conflict of interest. It also serves an educational function, and that's why I like the idea Kelly pointed out of making it in the personnel policies as a whole, so people are sensitized to this, so they're trained on it when they start working for the city, particularly when they have any role in expending city funds. So I see that really as posing an opportunity to enhance the ethicality and the ethical knowledge and sophistication of our staff and of our community. So I'm very pleased with what I'm hearing, and I will be supporting it.
Further discussion or questions? Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. Seeing none, Kelly, please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Quadrigula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski, Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 4.5. This is the 2020 U.S. Census Marketing Budget and Outreach Plan. In June of 2019, I had formed a 16-member complete count committee to assist the city in achieving an accurate census count. The City Council set aside $25,000 in the Planning Department's 2020 budget to promote the census to Minot residents. The CCC has completed a marketing budget and outreach plan that is ready for review and approval by the City Council. There are two recommendations coming forward. First, the approval of the 2020 U.S. Census Marketing Budget and Outreach Plan, and two, adopt the attached resolution and return the Community Development and to return to the Community Development Department.
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Alderman Pittner to approve, second by Alderman Olson. Good evening, Mr. Billingsley.
Good evening, Mayor Sitman and members of the council. If you recall earlier this year, when you adopted the 2020 budget, you appropriated $25,000 towards marketing the census to Minot residents. A complete count committee that the mayor mentioned has been formed. We've gone over the proposed budget for the last 3 months or so. We've come up with a final draft for you to review and approve tonight. I'd like to go through that real quick here. I'm trying to take less than 5 minutes. First of all, the Complete Count Committee set aside some goals for this whole process. The first was to disseminate and spread factual information about the census to Minot residents, encourage participation and raise awareness of the census, support and assist our census takers as they work out in the field, And number 4 is to formulate a complete count committee utilizing community leaders. The complete count committee is made up of these individuals. I'm chairing the committee. Alderman Olson is our liaison from the city council. Derek Hackett is on the committee, and along with Janet Anderson. Non-city employees and representatives are Tom Alexander from Minot Housing Authority, Mac McLeod, Minot Homeless Coalition, Kevin Harmon of Minot State University, Sergeant Stephen Atkins of Minot Air Force Base, John McMartin of the Chamber of Commerce, Rich Berg of the Cirrus Basin United Way, Roger Reich of the Minot Commission on Aging, Dr. Mark Mulmer with the Minot Public Schools, Rand Kuhn with Visit Minot, Tawny Kale with Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Scott Burlingame with Independence Inc., and Steve Oster with the Minot Ministerial Association. I'd like to thank them for volunteering their time on this committee. They've been very active, and they've been very helpful for this effort. I want to let everybody know that there are multiple ways to participate in the 2020 census. In the past, we traditionally have done through mail only. This will be the first census that will be available online or by phone. So you don't have to worry about filling out that form. You can go on your phone and participate. You can call a phone number at the Census Bureau and participate. Those dates will be between March 12th and April 30th of 2020, so it's about a 7-week window to participate. If you do not participate, an enumerator will visit your door multiple times probably until they receive a count, and that will take place between May and July of next summer. Took a look at some records from 2010, our self-participation rate within the city, and this is broken down by census tracts. And you can see on the east side of our city, we had the lowest participation rate. And in terms of participation rate, this is people who responded to the mail-in survey only. These were not people who participated through an enumerator. These were people who participated during the months of March and April of 2010. Approximately 75 to 77% of the households on the east side of the city participated. The numbers were much higher on the west and southern sides of the city. Overall, our participation rate in 2010 was at 78%. Statewide, North Dakota's participation rate was 75%, and nationally it was 74%. So we technically were still higher. Even in our census tracts that had the lowest participation rates, we still were above statewide and national averages. I'm pleased to report that we've received 3 grants from the North Dakota Department of Commerce for funding assistance. We received a grant for $1,800 to print 7,500 door hanger advertisements that will be placed on all apartment unit doors and Minot Housing Authority managed apartment unit doors throughout the city. $4,500 grant to print 80,000 grocery bag inserts, and they'll be distributed at the Marketplace food stores all throughout the city as well. And then $5,000 to advertise on both sides of one city transit bus and all city sanitation vehicles for 4 months. And that grant, there's a little bit of paperwork I still have to submit to the state. It's not official yet, that's why I have the asterisk next to it. However, we should have that approval within the next week or two. The grant, the budget for the $25,000 that was appropriated, it's broken down in this manner here. We have census stations. We have 3 portable kiosks that we're going to place in random locations throughout the city. The budget on that is very low, about $800 total. We're going to print a lot of print materials, of course, banners, posters, flyers, the previously mentioned grocery bag inserts, bookmarks, door hangers, even some other swag, miscellaneous swag as well. Several $1,000s will be put into that. Into those categories. And of course, where you see the $0, that's where the state grant is going to cover that cost. Traditional media, we're going to advertise in the Minot Daily News and Northern Century, $3,500 there. $4,900 on radio. We're going to play 700 radio advertisements on all the radio stations throughout the city. Social media, we're going to advertise on Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. About $2,000 there to advertise on social media. The mobile advertising, of course, will be covered by the state grant, so the $5,000 will cover that. And then we're going to purchase some clothing for the volunteers who are going to be working the kiosks and along with city staff and other people, all of our CCC members. And then we're going to set aside some snacks and beverages. What a better way to get people to participate in the census than to offer them a snack or beverage at one of the mobile kiosk sites. We're also going to put on a census event on Census Day, which is April 1st of 2020. And so those expenses will be covered under that category. And then we've set aside about 10% of our budget for contingency, just in case there's any cost overruns. Lastly, I'd like to talk to you about the mobile kiosk locations. Since this is the first census we can now take out to the people rather than hope that they respond to the paper surveys. We've confirmed locations we're gonna have a permanent site at the Minot Public Library for where people can participate in the census online. Marketplace Foods is gonna allow us to have kiosk locations in their stores throughout the city. The food pantries and soup kitchens are going to allow us to set up a kiosk location. We have at least 6 churches online now, probably more in the near future, that have agreed to set up a kiosk in the church on Sunday morning for one of their services. Unconfirmed locations, we're going to try to go out to the oil field worker safety meetings, or their mandatory meetings monthly, to try to get the oil field workers in place. We'll try to do that with other places, like, for example, like the Trinity construction workers. There's several of them coming in from out of town, too. We'll try to get them as well. Minot Air Force Base, they're not sure if they'll allow us to have a temporary kiosk there. They're going to investigate, see if they can allow a permanent kiosk location at the Air Force Base. So hoping to hear some good news from them in the near future. We have about 4 hockey games that we can put these kiosk locations at during the month of March. And then there's also miscellaneous community events that Visit Minot has on their schedule that we're planning on going to. We're trying to get as many people to participate in the census. Again, like the 2010 census had a 78% participation rate. I'm hoping to push that well into the 80s by going out to these locations and offering the census to those who may not want us to fill it out online or answer the door for a census worker, but it only takes a few minutes for us to reply online and participate that way. So with that, that's my presentation. I stand available for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Billingsley. And just for the folks that might be watching at home, the entire component of looking at the 2020 census is if we're able to reach a community being 50,000, we become an entitlement city, which is not just the CDBG guaranteed dollars of hundreds of thousands of dollars towards whether it be LMI housing or other activities that are relating to that, but it also does put us into a category across the nation where some businesses or others might be looking to relocate. Typically, they look at communities that are 50,000 or bigger. So it essentially puts us into a category that has a much greater potential for economic development within some of those components as well. I'm sure there are much more and other tertiary effects as well, kind of the 2 main pieces with that. Alderman Straight, you had that look like you had a question earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Billingsley, did the city of Minot secure any of these grants previously in 2010?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Straight, I don't believe there were any grants available in 2010. The records that I had from the 2010 census were that the city council put $5,000 into promoting the census, and I believe that they received a $5,000 grant from a local, I can't think of the name of the company now. It's, I think, an Odell grant. Is that what it was called? So I think they had $10,000 budgeted towards their census in 2010. This year, we're going to have $36,000 budgeted for our census.
Mr.
Yes.
Mayor,
Yes, continue.
I just appreciate hearing that, because I'm always curious how we're being reflective and trying to learn. So I appreciate the marketing strategy and the public being aware of it as well. So thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Billingsley? Only one component, Brian, that came to mind here as we were talking. I know you and I have had several conversations about this, but our retirement communities that might be short-term or long-term, if we could also include maybe a perspective on that, as it hadn't come to top of mind until just now. So if we could also add that to our collection.
Mr. Mayor, I believe the retirement communities are counted by the Census Bureau themselves. I think they go to the nursing homes and the assisted living facilities themselves. So I don't think we need to worry about reaching out to them, but I'll double check and make sure of that.
Perfect. I appreciate that, Brian.
Thank you.
Further questions, Alderman Padragula?
We've talked about this privately, and I've put in form of a memo, but I just want to make sure that individuals who are living in custodial care facilities or highly supervised living facilities, such as homes for developmentally disabled, are covered. I know at least 6, probably 10 residents each. Every person will count, and unfortunately, they weren't listed as hard-to-count populations. We think the assumption is everybody has Twitter, everybody reads the paper, everybody watches television. Well, some people aren't as able to do that, and I think it's very, very important that we reach out to them and make sure that the organizations who run these facilities are fully in the loop and have bought into this. We have this obligation toward the least of us.
Very good. Alderman Olson?
Yes, and just a kind of open invitation to anyone that has other ideas. You brought up some ideas now. We were just informed of the oil workers safety meetings where we could access some of those workers. And, you know, if there's a group that we have forgotten, we certainly need to know because we do want to count everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alderman Olson. Further questions or discussion?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Alderman Wolski.
I just saw the, one of the lines was for some banners in the lead up to this. If we got one of those plastered across the front of our dais here, that's a pretty valuable spot. I'm not sure if we're using it for anything else.
We'll work on that.
Put it right behind me, maybe even. All right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to number 5 on our agenda this evening, which is personal appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward and talk about city business that is either on or not on our agenda this evening. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but if you could, just your name and address for the record.
Tom Bodette, Motel 6. I'm Tim Knutson. I'm with, I'm at 1721 10th Street Southwest in Minot. And I'm the realtor on the Big M building, and I just want to invite, if anybody wants to hike the stairs, the elevator's not working right now, but if anybody wants to take a look, if you haven't been there, I have a key. So I just want to invite any of the aldermen or anybody that wants to come with you. We can go take a look at that. If you have any questions or anything like that too. And I'm curious too if I can get a copy of the report of how they came up with that evaluation. If they'd like to get that emailed to me, if that's not too big of a file. So.
We can make sure that we get that to you very shortly.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And any questions for me about the Big M building? And not that I know everything about it, but.
Questions for Mr. Knutson, as the item was held until a later date.
All right.
If not, any of the aldermen can certainly reach out to you and either take a tour themselves or get information.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Once again, this is an opportunity for personal appearances on any item that was on or not on our agenda regarding city business. Seeing none, we'll move on to miscellaneous and discussion items. This is the City of Minot Community Engagement Strategy 6.1. Over the past year or two, several high-profile city projects have garnered criticism regarding the way that the city handles community input and engagement. Inconsistencies in approach by the department created confusion and frustration for community members. Recognizing the need to improve the consistency and quality of the city's public engagement for various programs, plans, and projects across all departments, staff development a community engagement focus group to study and improve the city's engagement approach and develop a strategy for future engagement. This is a no action item. However, I believe we do have our City Public Information Officer, Derek Hackett, who is going to provide some further information for us this evening. Good evening, Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council. Thanks for letting me step outside of the little box I have behind the dais there and getting some fresh air. That's really nice. Little transparency. First off, I am batting leadoff for our city attorney's department report, and I promised her I would screw up as much as often here to make her look a little bit better, so just be prepared for that. It's all intentional. But all jokes aside, thanks for letting me sort of set the table. If you've read the report attached to the agenda or not, I'd like to expound a few things on that so you have a better understanding of where we're at, where our headspace was, and sort of the process, and of course open up for any questions you may have at this time. But first off, a little overview on what we've done. This is months of work that the team has actually been a part of, and we're talking almost 2 years here, about 19 months, I think. I'd love to tell you it's been consecutive, nose to the grindstone work for all those months, but depending on priorities the city may have, sometimes the work was more active some months than others. But during those months, we looked at over a dozen different strategies from all over the world, in fact, including Sydney, Australia, Montreal, some domestic places like Novato, California, places that are revered for their engagement and the strategies that they use. We took all of those, we plucked our favorite little pieces of these, tweaked them to fit our community the way we felt best, and combined them into the puzzle that's in front of you as a 29-page report today. So among these months of work, we kind of had some internal debates with the working group on who this report was for. Is it for the community? Is it for the council? Ultimately, we landed on this is a strategy for the staff to use and go forward with the council and the community in mind, of course. Now, part of that is setting the expectations for ourselves, but also the expectations for the community. The title of this report is Listen, Speak, Act. Now, that is a direct reflection of what we expect the community to participate in this strategy. We're hoping that we give them the proper opportunities to listen to us, to speak to us, and to act with us in a lot of these strategies, and as we go forward in crafting a lot of plans for various initiatives or projects or anything like that. Of course, we want to set the expectations for the staff and the council as well, and we do that within the strategy. And of course, this strategy is really three main parts. It is the what and the why, the when and the who, as well as the how. Today, I'm going to focus more on the latter two because the what and why should be pretty clear when we actually get into reading the report. But before I go on that, I want to acknowledge the people that have worked on this. To the left of your screen is the team that was included in compiling this report. The many different revisions we've done over the last several months, back and forth meetings and emails. Among that was some key leadership from our city manager, our executive secretary, Tammy Stroklin, of course, our clerk, Kelly Matulka, our library director, Janet Anderson, and me as well. It would be sadly ironic if we go forward with a community engagement strategy and not engage the community. So we did that. We were practicing what we were trying to preach, and we did compile a focus group of several citizens, including our council liaison for the group, which was Alderman Padragula. We cannot thank those individuals enough for their time that they gave us to help make sure we were on the right path and set the framework for what was the final draft that is attached to the agenda that hopefully you will get a chance to review. Now, a few of the goals we thought about as we were compiling this strategy was to provide a framework for us, the staff. Many departments already do a lot of engagement. Some of them are requirements for state or federal contracts. Some of them we just do out of habit. We wanted to make sure that we can standardize a lot of the things we do and to make sure that everybody is moving in the same direction. So we wanted to build that framework. Another thing we tried to do is build confidence. We wanted to build confidence within the community in what we were doing as an organization. We wanted them to know that we are trying to put things in front of them, making sure that they're included in our process, and that we value all of the information and their opinions and perspectives on a lot of things that we do. We also wanted to build confidence for you as a body to make sure that when we bring an initiative or a project or something that it was encompassed in this strategy, you feel confident in the process that we took to bring it to you to make sure you felt more confident in the decision that you will finally make. And then, of course, we wanted to establish a culture. Again, we do a lot of engagement already. But we want to make it standardized and easy to adopt. So we have the expectations and the culture built in that we will be using this on all of the applicable projects, and that the community knows that that is what we're going to do as we go forward. So let's talk about the strategy a little bit. First thing, once we get the knowledge base built up for all of the staff that would be taking part of this, is to assign them to assess the impact levels. We're going to get to a lot of this in a moment, but after that, we will take the impact and translate to that what we would expect the level of engagement to be. After that, we will complete the engagement toolkit that is attached to the strategy, and then, of course, we would implement the engagement strategy. So talking about the levels of impact that we're going to try to assess, we set this up in essentially 3 levels. Level 1, 2, and 3, with level 1 being low risk, really run-of-the-mill stuff. This is mostly what we do. Take next week, for example, with our holiday hours and city office hours. We'll be closed on Tuesday and Wednesday. That's a level 1. It's widely accepted, not usually contentious, usually being the operative word there, issue. That is a low impact. Level 2, something maybe like a major road reconstruction. Level 3 is something much larger, something that has a lot of opportunities for controversy that we'd want to manage through, thinking like strategic planning and things like that. Once you identify what the level of impact will be, you'll basically be assigned what level of engagement will be expected, and these 5 levels are what we have. Now, we didn't just invent these. These are best practice levels of participation by the International Association of Public Participation. It goes in this order: inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. Well, here's what those actually mean. Inform are very basic. Usually we do this on almost everything we do. That is providing information, balanced and objective, so people understand the problem, the goal, the alternatives, and everything that we're trying to accomplish. Then we get into consult. This is where we're looking for some feedback. This is when we're asking the public to speak to us. We want feedback on the analysis, the alternatives, or any kind of decisions we made. The next level, of course, we take it a step further. That's the involve. This is a participatory process. This is where this is like focus groups, for example. When we need people to come in and help guide us through the decision-making process, help set alternatives, and really be a part of the process. And collaborate, we take that even further. We have to partner with the public on every aspect of the decision-making process and really include them into this. This is when we're getting into the act. And then finally, the empower level. This is when we empower the people to help make that final decision. I'm thinking ad hoc committees are something that would be classified under the empower level. Here's how the levels of impact will actually translate to levels of engagement. All of this is in the strategy that is attached to the agenda, but just giving you an idea. For a level 1 impact, it is expected that you will reach the informed level of engagement. Of course, there's a potential for the consult level. Level 2, it is expected to inform, consult, and involve, and leaving the door open for collaborate. And level 3, of course, we incorporate all 5 levels, expected to do the first 4: inform, consult, involve, collaborate, with the door open for empower. Here's the expectation we have for the community when we go through these levels of engagement. Inform, we're looking for the community to really just listen to us, hear what we're having to say. This is a pretty informal process, social media, press releases, things like that. And then consult and involve, we're asking them to speak to us. And of course, collaborate, empower, we're looking for some action from the community. So to set the expectations, here's a RACI, or responsibility, accountability, consult, and inform matrix, so you understand what everybody's role is going to be depending on the level of impact. As you can see, department staff is responsible for just about everything on that level. As the level of impact increases, that responsibility shifts over a little bit from department heads to my office to city manager, city council. Here's something I want to point out, though. Right here, this guy, he's a tool, a resource, I should say, for a lot of the activities that will be happening under the engagement strategy. Anything that, I know it says responsibilities on the department staff for level 1. That doesn't mean that's not going to come through Brian and I in our office. We're going to be a part of just about every process that we do because that is our role with the city. So down to planning and implementing. So to create a plan, we really need to outline and set the goals and objectives as well as boundaries. Those are going to be very important on a lot of this. We need to identify an audience and stakeholders. We need to determine the level of impact, thus determining the level of engagement required. And we cannot forget to really keep in mind the required resources and the required time for each plan. The engagement plan should also, of course, outline the expectation of feedback and reporting. How are they going to relay feedback to the council, as well as the stakeholders that will be impacted? And of course, how are they going to evaluate and monitor? And resources needed is listed here again, because it's very important. And here's a little matrix. It kind of goes without saying, but the more public participation we're going to need in this strategy, the more time and the more resources that will be needed as well. So when we're getting to the toolkit at the back 4 pages or so of the strategy, it's really like a worksheet. We designed this to keep really 6 key focuses in mind. First is to clarify and communicate the purpose. People need to know why they're going to be in that room and why they're here to help us. We also need to meet people where they are. That means not always holding meetings in our facilities. We need to go to where people are accessible. And that also takes into account less of the physical barrier, but some of the non-physical barriers. Childcare is one. People's time. Does it need to be a day meeting or an evening meeting? Those all need to be considered when building an engagement plan through this strategy. And then, of course, we want to orient and prepare members for success. Now, this one can be convoluted. What this really means is we want to make sure people understand what decisions have been made already, why, how, and by whom. We want to make sure everybody has reviewed and understood the data that will be discussed in a lot of the decision-making process. We want to outline the big issues, some opportunities and challenges that the initiatives may face. We want to clarify everybody's role in the room, depending on what activity is being done. And of course, we want to make sure that we introduce everybody to each other, make sure that we start to build a team. If it's a focus group or an ad hoc or something like that, people are familiar with one another. Another focus would be acknowledge and mitigate power differentials. This is to ensure fair treatment. So what this means is we need to make sure that communication is transparent. And by that I mean to ensure that the stakeholders understand everyone's interests at the table. Because there's going to be a variety of people in a lot of these in these roles. So we need to make sure that everybody's open and honest on why they're there and what their role is and how they feel about a lot of the project. We need to facilitate inclusively. We need to make sure people are participating and engaged in the engagement plan. Otherwise, what's the point? That includes calling out some people that might be a little bit more quietly, not calling them out for being quiet, but making sure they have an opportunity and chance to speak in a lot of those settings. And then most importantly, in my opinion, is allow steam to blow. There are times when we go forward on projects and initiatives that can be contentious. We need to allow people the opportunity to vent. If it's in a public meeting or in a private meeting or any kind of opportunity that we have to collect people, we need them to have that almost therapeutic time to get what's off their chest. This is most likely going to happen if we proceed with a project or an initiative that we haven't been engaging to, kind of picking up in the middle. People may be frustrated. We need to have that moment where everybody can clear their mind, get it off their chest, and then we can make sure that they understand that we're listening. Because if we're not listening, it's just going to get worse from there. So those are some of the key focuses that we're going to ask staff to keep in mind when they're going through the toolkit. Here's the questions of the toolkit. I'm not going to go through each one of these. Just wanted to outline this. There's about 4 pages that are almost like a checklist or a fill-in-the-blank kind of worksheet to help establish the ideas for the plan. It won't take them through an entire engagement plan when they're building one, but it will help them concentrate and focus the ideas and the resources and the stakeholders. It will help them identify everything that they need to know. So in short, that's a quick overview of the strategy before you, and I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hackett. Questions for our public information officer, as that was a significant amount of information that was very well highlighted and gone through, and I'm sure we'll likely spend some time even going through that as the days wear on, because it is a significant amount of information. And we certainly appreciate all of the work that went into that, not only on staff, but the community participation, as you pointed out. Alderman Janser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo those comments and then just ask, Derek, so if this gets finalized and is in the implementation stage, is there like a plan to include this in orientation or is there like a training component for people who would be using this on city staff?
I fully expect, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Janser, I fully expect to go through with this, with the departments, whether it's department heads, superintendents, however they want to do that, and do some formalized training and actually make sort of a workshop to help them fully understand how to utilize this strategy. Make sure that we give our staff the essential tools to actually complete this. The last thing we want to do is to adopt this as a strategy, as a policy, and let it sit on a shelf.
Thank you.
Further questions for PIO? Alderman Wolski.
Mayor Sitma, thanks. Mr. Hackett, I appreciate the presentation. I appreciate the focused-in approach that seems to be really designed for staff in terms to help work a process and a system to improve results. One thing that I'm sitting here thinking that I'm curious about is all the different elements of community engagement, what might fit on that very broad, under that broad umbrella that were originally on the whiteboard and then got kind of cut so we could focus on a staff-based system of, I would say, initiative-focused community engagement. And I'm going to be thinking about this over the next couple of weeks, and I'll run into you and we'll chat about it more. But I'm curious about what some of those elements of community engagement that aren't in this plan, and if we have an approach for them. And if that's a very vague and ambiguous question, I apologize, and I will attempt to find some clarity as the next time I come. But I think back to maybe 18 months ago where we had a question specifically about youth engagement, which we have attempted a few times through things like the mayor's initiative and the videos that we did as a part of the State of the City. This is a continuing question that the governor seems to be hitting on in terms of asking kids, getting kids engaged. It seems like it's a little bit outside. That question is a little outside this particular policy. And so those are the types of things that I still want to be thinking about solutions to as we move forward. But I like what we've got here. I think this is a very focused in and intentional tool.
Sure. Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, maybe to help you out a little bit or make you a little bit more at ease, there is a matrix inside of the strategy that outlines maybe not every idea out there that can be used as a communication or an engagement tool, but a lot of them, including segmented in which level of engagement they may fit best. So as you review this, take a look at that, and that would be a great place to, if anybody has any ideas, to mark those as track changes and let us know so we can make sure that's as inclusive as possible. We don't want to leave any stone unturned in this. And this is our first communication or community engagement strategy, so we're building something from nothing here. I'm sure there's some other things that we're going to need to implement in the future.
Further questions for Derek? Once again, thank you, Derek, and to everyone that participated through this process over a very lengthy period of time, and the compilation that's in our packet. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
With that takes us to number 7, the long-awaited, our department report from our city attorney. Ms. Kelly Hendershot is making her way to the front, and I believe we have some handouts here as well.
See if I can figure out the clicker. All right, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight and report on our activities that we've been undertaking in the city attorney's office. I'm excited to be here and let you know what we do and to really highlight some of the things that we've been working on this year. First off, I wanted to start off with just an overview of the full-time employees that work in the city attorney's office. First, you're all aware that I'm the city attorney and that I have worked here for just about 8 years. That'll be 8 years in January. Steph Stahlheim is our assistant city attorney. She has practiced law throughout the state of North Dakota and also in Idaho, and she has been with the city for 4.5 years. Nancy Horse is our full-time administrative assistant. She is retired from the state. She was formerly a court recorder for the court over at the Ward County Courthouse, and she has been here since she retired from that agency, which was 4.5 years ago. And then our most recent new employee, I guess she's not new anymore, is Lacey McCartan, and she is a full-time city employee. Half of her workload is dedicated to our office, and half of her workload is dedicated to CDBG projects. So she's a 0.5 employee for our office. And she's been here for 3.5 years. So before I get started on what we're doing and some of the projects that we've been working on this year, I thought it would be helpful to provide just a brief history of our office, because it is a relatively new office of the city. Prior to 2009, the city engaged with private legal counsel to provide services for the city for city business. And in addition to that, the city had a joint powers agreement with Ward County, where the Ward County State's Attorney's Office provided the prosecution services for the city. In 2009, the city hired its first in-house attorney, and that was John Van Grinsven. And with John, a part-time administrative assistant was hired. As you're all well aware, major significant events occurred between 2009 and 2012, which resulted in the city deciding to hire a second in-house attorney, and that was me. And from 2012 till about the end of 2018, that assistant city attorney position was almost entirely devoted to prosecuting municipal ordinance violations, municipal court and district court. There was some level of involvement in city business, but nearly all of the time was dedicated to that prosecuting. In 2019, for the first time since that joint powers agreement, the City Council approved a contract which allowed the full-time employee attorneys to dedicate more time to city business, which we're grateful for, and grateful for the approval of the contract tonight of our new prosecuting attorney. And so that's sort of where we're at today. So comparing our office to other offices and city attorney offices throughout the state, you can see that the other cities in North Dakota really vary in how they set up their city attorney's offices. They're all structured a little bit differently. Some have private firms, some have full-time employees, and some have a combination of that. So what we're doing is really not out of the usual structure of any other city across the state. So what does a city attorney do? A lot of people have a lot of different ideas about what we do in our office. And so I'm hoping that today that I can clarify what that is that we do and provide that information to you tonight. So first off, we provide legal advice to elected officials and city staff. And one thing I really want to emphasize with this presentation is who our office represents. Our office represents the city as an organization. We do not represent any individual council members. We don't represent individual staff members, and we don't represent individual citizens. We represent the city, which acts through this body, the City Council. And we provide advice to city council members and staff members in individual or group settings. And so that can be a little bit confusing on who we actually represent, but it's a really important distinction to make. And so I provided you with some handouts, of course, I couldn't resist. And one of those handouts was Rule 1.13 of the North Dakota Rules of Professional Conduct. And those are the rules that all attorneys in the state of North Dakota are required to comply with in order to maintain licensure. And the specific rule I provided was an organization as a client. And that rule directly relates to our representation of the city as a governmental entity. And it provides some good information that I thought would benefit you all in understanding how our relationship works. In addition, I also provided a North Dakota League of Cities City Scan article, which talks about how to get the most out of your relationship and partnership with the city attorney's office. And that has a lot of really interesting information that I thought you would all enjoy reading. And if anyone has any questions about that or comments about either of those documents, Steph and I would both be happy to sit down with any of you to discuss those further. We also draft and review contracts. As you know, there's a great variety of contracts that come before the City Council, and we are generally involved in the review or some component of all of those contracts, whether it's a construction contract, a lease, or a contract for laundering services for firefighter uniforms. We generally see those agreements before they come to you. One thing that we did this year was implement a formal contract review process. We created a contract review form and set that process up to make sure that we maintain consistency in our contract review process. Well, this has generally been followed throughout the history of the city. We really wanted to formalize that and make sure that it's consistently followed and applied for all of the agreements that the city has. And another thing, kind of like what Dave talked about earlier with purchasing policy, we're setting up processes that can be implemented into the ERP system, and so that we can immediately start using those processes or continue using those processes, and that it will work through that system. Another thing we do is we draft and review city ordinances. As you know, our office is central to reviewing ordinances and drafting those. If we don't review an ordinance, we generally do review it before it comes to the City Council, especially if it relates to a change or modification of any of our city codes. Here are some of the ordinances that we revised this year. And then I also just provided our running list of some that are under revision right now and to be reviewed in the near future. We prosecute violations of municipal ordinance. And our office is responsible for prosecuting municipal ordinance violations. We represent the city at municipal court, district court, and if necessary, at the North Dakota Supreme Court. Here's some data information on the number of violations that we prosecute and how that's sort of changed over the last few years. And then I wanted to highlight the top criminal prosecutions that we have in the city of Minot. These are probably the top 5. By far, though, the top 3 that we prosecute are driving under suspension, driving under the influence, and petty theft. And those are only the criminal prosecutions. Our office also prosecutes traffic violations, and I didn't list the top traffic violations because these are the more substantial issues we see. In 2016, this is another component of the prosecuting, Marcy's Law was approved. It was an initiated constitutional measure that the North Dakota voters approved, and essentially it incorporated a number of victim rights, crime victim rights, into our state constitution, and with that came a number of obligations on law enforcement agencies and prosecutors' offices. While we've always advocated for the rights of victims of the crimes that come through municipal court, this put an additional requirement and additional administrative responsibilities on our office and the Minot Police Department. And those include just informing people of their rights, making sure that they've received this Marcy's card, which was specifically required to be provided to each victim, and then to tracking and whoever has asserted those rights. So our office maintains a spreadsheet where we track the number of victims, which case they relate to, their personal information, whether they've received a Marcy's card, whether those rights have been asserted, if any specific rights have been asserted, which rights have been asserted, and then issues relating to restitution, whether they're seeking restitution, and whether that has been obtained through a court judgment. And just for your information, I checked on our number just last week, and I think we had 340 victims that we tracked to date for this year. Our office also manages outside litigation files. As you all know, we have a number of pending litigation files, and I'm sure you read about them every month in my monthly report. And we have some that are acquisitions and eminent domain cases or inverse condemnation cases relating to flood control. We have some that are initiated by the city, and then we have some that are claims against the city in which we have retained counsel through the North Dakota Insurance Reserve Fund. Our office manages all of those cases and communicates regularly with the outside counsel and acts as a liaison between outside counsel and city staff and elected officials. In addition to that, a thing that we have implemented this year is after action reviews. Once the matters are closed, we have begun a process where we review the issues that were discussed in the litigation and identify a team of people who have knowledge of the issues, get together with that team and review what actually occurred and where we can make improvements to policies, processes, and ordinances. And then we complete a report, provide that report with the recommendations to the city manager, who determines which recommendations should be implemented and by whom. And so that is a new process as of this year. And lastly, we provide procedural and legal advice at city meetings. Our office is present at almost all the city council meetings and planning commission meetings, in addition to city council appointed committees. We also provide advice at internal city committee meetings and participate in those meetings. And here's just a sampling of some of the committees that we've participated in. So in conclusion, I just wanted to highlight some of the strengths of our office. Accessibility and dependability. We have strong relationships with other departments in the city, and we maintain high ethical standards and integrity. And then some of our challenges. The first is meeting the wide-ranging demands of the city, and by that I mean our office sees a wide variety of issues. We never really know what's going to come through the door that day or what call we're going to receive, whether it's a planning issue, a bidding issue, or somebody asking how you disinter a body from the cemetery. Those questions come through our office, and making sure that we are able to adequately provide advice to our city staff and the elected officials, and just making sure that we are able to prioritize the issues that come before our office is a challenge that we face. Also, continuing to update processes and policies, and making sure that those processes and policies are consistently followed. We talk a lot about how the only thing worse than not having a policy at all is having a policy that's not followed. And so that's something that our office is very concerned about and make sure that we avoid that type of processing. And lastly, I just want to sincerely wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holiday Season from our office. Few edits.
Is that legalese?
And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hendershot. I also want to congratulate you.
Oh, really?
By far, since following the council since about 2001, 2002, that is the most that any city attorney has ever spoken during any city council meeting that I have ever been bear witness to or been at the dais to. So
I
congratulations.
don't know if that's a congratulation.
Any questions for our city attorney? Alderman Patagula.
Just a comment, dating back a few years earlier than you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if this is the most an attorney has spoken, but it's certainly the most clearly an attorney has spoken. I really appreciate that as someone who does a great deal of work in the area of forensic psychology, was in court constantly, spent an hour and a half on the phone with 2 attorneys today. From that professional perspective, and someone who has some attorneys in the family, remarkably clear, remarkably, I think, appropriate and accurate summary of what an attorney does for a municipality, light years beyond what we've had. And the growth of the department has been gradual. When I first started here in 1998, city council members had asked for permission to phone or talk with the city attorney, which is pretty bizarre. And since we've gotten people on staff, that's become easier to have the resources and your expertise available. And I'm just delighted and very pleased with the resources staff-wise we have, and the kind of guidance we've been getting and the kind of professionalism I've seen, again, from a more than an educated layperson's perspective. Don't have a law degree or a law license, but really appreciate that from my perspective tremendously.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments for our city attorney?
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So with that, we move to liaison reports. We will start over to my left, I think, tonight here with Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You caught me off guard, but as many of you might know, Steph Shanerock has recently been hired as the Executive Director of Visit Minot. So that's a new change for the organization and one of the committees I sit on. And yeah, that's what I'll leave it with, I guess, tonight.
Okay, fantastic. Alderman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, two of the committees that have kept me fairly busy over the last number of weeks have already been discussed tonight. One is the Census Committee, which you've gotten the update on that, and the other is the Buy Local Committee. And as you can see, we've got a recommendation before you for that as well.
Alderman Patagula.
Nothing to report, sir.
Alderman Wolski.
Yeah, Mayor, thank you. Planning and Zoning Steering meeting this Wednesday. That work is ongoing. We are getting towards the end of it. The hope is to have a draft to the Planning Commission and Council, I think, into late winter or early spring. But yeah, every other Wednesday, starting just to get it on your calendar this Wednesday, and then every other after that.
Thank you, Alderman Wolski. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor, I have no report. We have not met.
Okay. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Met with several different committees, library, county, nothing really to report there. I am the liaison to the Gathering Space Initiative and Project. We have had a response from the owner of Site Number 3, and our environmental review has begun, and we are on pace to meet our self-imposed February deadline for possibly an initial offer. Sit on the All Seasons board, and I guess the only thing to report there is ICE will be at the All Seasons through the spring months in conjunction with the Park Board to help them out with some technical difficulties on one of their sheets. So that is it.
I suppose last but not least, I sit on the City Hall Liaison Committee. We had that before us tonight. I also sit on the Ward County Weed Board, which we did meet this morning, and a number of other activities that are going on in the county. Thankfully, most of ours within the city, I think hopefully will be taken care of within this very soon within one of our bigger tracks. An issue I hope to have in front of the City Council for some good news down the road. And then MADC, as we, as a group, are looking for our executive director from MADC, as well as working with other projects. Of course, we have John McMartin as our temporary director until a permanent is found. So with that, we are at the end of our reports, and we have just one item left before us, and that is number 9, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Alderman Janser. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.